Yesterday marked the first full day of opening remarks from House Democrats as they made the case for impeaching Donald Trump.
Here to discuss the history of impeachment is journalist Chris Hedges. He joins us now via Skype. Great to see you again, Chris. Welcome back to Rising.
Thank you.
What did you make of the opening arguments made by the Democrats yesterday?
Well, my big problem with the Democrats is that it's a selective use of constitutional violations. Those violations that have been normalized by the Bush and Obama administrations are ignored. In fact, I think the constitutional violations that they've charged Trump with in comparison are probably the most trivial because, of course, Trump has also continued those violations. What are they? Those would be 9 illegal wars. Wars are supposed to be declared by Congress. We include Yemen. This is the wholesale surveillance begun by the Bush administration, exposed by Edward Snowden, in direct violation of the Fourth Amendment and the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, which makes it a crime for the government to surveil any U.S. citizen. The global programming of extraordinary rendition, kidnapping, and torture. The decision by the Obama administration to reinterpret the 2002 Authorization to Use Military Force Act to give them the right to act as judge, jury, and executioner and assassinate U.S. citizens. I'm talking, of course, about Anwar al-Awlaki and later, 2 weeks later, a 16-year-old son. Section 1021 of the National Defense Authorization Act overturns the 1878 Posse Comitatus Act, which prohibits the military as a domestic police force. Then you have all sorts of others violating treaty clauses, which needs Senate ratification. So, there's a long litany of violations that have empowered the imperial presidency that the Democrats don't want to touch. And that really worries me. When we talk about tyranny, Adam Schiff talked about tyranny yesterday, until those violations are ruled back, all of them in the hands of somebody like Trump become very dangerous.
Yeah, and Chris, one thing that particularly disturbed me, I highlighted this morning, is when Adam Schiff said that we have to fight Russia over there so that we don't have to fight them over here. I mean, that is rhetoric which is highly incendiary, and as you can lay out for the audience, that's how people justify endless war in Iraq and Afghanistan, and now apparently we're at war and fearful of a Russian invasion of our homeland.
Right. I mean, I think you raise a really good point, because the Democratic Party engages in a form of demagoguery every bit as pernicious as the demagoguery that the Trump White House does. So the Trump White House goes after Muslims and immigrants, undocumented workers, the press, on and on and on. But the Democratic Party is just as bad. It refuses to acknowledge or accept its complicity in the neoliberal programs, deindustrialization, that created the severe social inequality that we live in. And so, of course, they blame Russia and Putin for Donald Trump's election, which, we went through the whole Mueller 2 years of this kind of hyperventilating over Russiagate. There's no there. I'm not saying, by the way, that the Russians didn't try and interfere in the election. I spent 20 years as a foreign correspondent. I'm sure they did. We did. We spent $1.5 billion to get Yeltsin reelected in 1996 in Russia. So, yeah, I mean, that's what foreign governments do. But that leap that somehow, Russia is Trump is a Putin agent is just as dangerous and just as non-reality based as the kind of stuff that spews out of Trump's mouth. And so, yeah, I think that's an extremely important point, that the Democrats are also living in an alternative reality.
Yeah, I mean, I saw all kinds of, when positive polls for Bernie Sanders have come out, I see all kinds of people in the comments saying, oh, it's the Russians, it's bots, et cetera, et cetera. So this has really pervaded our whole politics. I wanted you to kind of put your other hat on, though, because you wrote a fantastic book called America, the Farewell Tour, where you just talk to a lot of Americans about what's going on in their lives. And it was interesting because I was looking at some of the New York Times reporting on how normal people are sort of processing what's happening with impeachment. And even the Democrats who were on board with impeachment, the issues that they raised that were their concerns with Donald Trump weren't actually the issue that's being prosecuted here by the Democrats in D.C. In fact, some of them brought up, right, the illegal assassination of Soleimani as a top concern as opposed to whatever happened in Ukraine. So I was wondering, given your sort of command of what normal people are feeling out there in the world, how do you think people are processing and reacting to impeachment in real time?
Well, we know from the opinion polls it's moved almost no one. And that's because none of these issues, a phone call to Zelensky, touches on the daily reality of the vast majority of Americans, almost 50% of whom don't even have would have to borrow anything over $1,000 for an emergency. The whole kind of job insecurity, underemployment, unemployment, which has been rendered invisible by the corporate media, the massive debt peonage, the crumbling infrastructures, the et cetera, this is the real reality that has been visited upon, especially American working men and women, by both the Democrats and the Republicans. And this is the kind of chattering of the courtier class. I mean, look, if we're going to have hearings, why don't we have hearings on the politicians and the generals who fed us 18 years of futile, endless war, which I would argue is the greatest strategic blunder in American history. I mean,
yes.
There's no substantial, it's all theater. I mean, we call this a trial. This isn't a trial by any stretch of the imagination. It's political farce. It's Gabriel Garcia Marquez' Chronicle of a Death Foretold. We know precisely what the outcome is going to be. And that's frightening, really, seriously. It's very, very frightening and shows utter contempt for the rule of law on which any democracy must be based.
Yeah, I think that's right, Chris. We also want to get your reaction, of course, to a friend of the show, Glenn Greenwald, who's been charged with crimes, cyber crimes by the Brazilian government. Seems like a complete overt political hit job against him. We just want to get your reaction and really just calling out the hypocrisy of so many people who claim that the U.S. press is under attack and have not a kind word, nary a word to say for the safety of a truly brave man.
Yes, thank you very much. That is very true. And what they're doing to Glenn is what they're doing to my friend Julian Assange. They're attempting to charge him with the crime of the pilfering or theft of material or documents. And if you notice, that's precisely what the United States has been trying to do to Assange, because it's a tricky situation if they've just published this material. I worked for the New York Times for 15 years. I published classified material on the front page of the newspaper. But if you charge the reporter, like Assange or Glenn, with the theft, then that actually becomes a criminal offense. So it's interesting that the tactic that Bolsonaro is using to go after Glenn is precisely the same tactic that the United States government uses to go after Julian.
Interesting. Yeah. Chris, it's always so great to have your perspective. We're really grateful for it.
Yeah,
appreciate
Thanks for having me.
Next on Rising, friend of the show, Matt Stoller. He's going to be here. Stick around.